At this point, you've done operations with fractions and you've done operations with decimals. But when we focused on fractions, we only added and subtracted fractions that already had like denominators. We wrote down in our notes, though, that the first step is to get a common denominator. So that's what we're going to focus on today. How do you get a common denominator? And how do you add fractions when they don't already have like denominators? Like all the problems we saw before. So go ahead and copy down your target, and I have two warm-up questions for you. What is the least common multiple of each pair? So I want you to try to write down the least common multiple of each pair. If you're not sure what that is, it'll help you if you write out the multiples of each number first. So write out 18 times 1, then 18 times 2, then 18 times 3, and you're looking for the lowest number that they have in common. So pause the video, try the warm-up, get your target, then press play. So for the warm-up, I suggested that you could write down the multiples because that would help you find the lowest one they have in common. 18 times 1 is 18, 18 times 2 is 36, 18 times 3 is 54, 18 times 4 is 72, and we could keep going. But when I start writing out the multiples of 27, I can see really quick that I already have my least common multiple listed. 27 times 1 is 27. 27 times 2 is 54. So there's no need to keep going because as soon as you run into this number that they both have as a multiple, that is the least common multiple. So the least common multiple for 18 and 27 is 54. We're going to use this idea to get a common denominator when you have fractions. So when I ask for the LCM or the least common multiple, this is what I'm talking about. For B, 13 and 8, the least common multiple is actually going to be their product. I know that because 13 is prime, and when you have a prime number, the lowest common multiple is just going to be that prime times whatever number you're talking about. You could list out 13 times 1, 13 times 2, 13 times 3, 13 times 4, and so on. But it's not going to run into the same multiple until you get as 8, until you do 13 times 8. So the least common multiple for the second pair is actually 104 because 13 is prime. So again, when adding and subtracting fractions, the first step is to find a common denominator. In order to get a common denominator, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply each fraction that you have in your problem by another fraction that is equal to 1 to keep your problem the same as the original problem. Then you're going to add and subtract the fractions and always check if you can simplify. So fill that in now. So let's try this first example. Mrs. Nettles has 1/2 of her bag of popcorn left after seeing the Hunger Games this weekend with Mrs. Von Block. Mrs. Von Block has 5/8 of her popcorn bag left. How much popcorn do they have all together? First, you need to write your problem. Since we want to know how much they have all together, what operation would you be doing? Adding. So you have 1/2 plus 5/8. In order to add fractions, you need to get a common denominator. One way to get a common denominator is to look for the LCM. Another way is to just multiply the denominators together, okay? We know that 2 and 8 are going to overlap at whatever number 2 times 8 is. So let's do the first problem that way. 2 times 8 is 16. Then that's what I want to get my new denominator to be. So now you have to figure out, well, what did I do to 2 to get 16? To get 2 to become 16, I multiplied it by 8. This is the step here. We're going to multiply by a fraction that is equal to 1. Because if we multiply anything by 1, it keeps it the same. So if you're going to multiply the bottom by 8, you actually have to multiply the top by 8 too. Because think about that, guys. What is 8 divided by 8? That's actually 1. So if you multiply the top and the bottom by the same number, you're keeping the fraction the same. So 1 times 8 is 8. Now when you do your second fraction, you know you want to get the denominator to become 16, so what do you have to multiply by? 2. And remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you're also doing to the top, because any number divided by itself is really 1, and so we didn't change the problem. We're just making it look a little different. So 8 times 2 is a 16, 5 times 2 gives you your new numerator. Now you have 8/16 plus 10/16. Once you have a common denominator, you're just going to add or subtract the fractions. We're right here on this third step. Remember from the first day of fractions, you just add the numerators, keep the denominator. So 8 plus 10 is going to give me 18. Keep that 16. And your last step is always, always, always check if you can simplify. I can take out a 2 from both of these. And remember, we're doing the same thing to the top and the bottom to keep it equal, which is going to give me 9/8. Or, how do you write that as a mixed number? 1 and 1/8. So my answer is 9/8 or 1 and 1/8 bags of popcorn. Remember, whenever you're doing a word problem, you should have a label on your answer. So what are we talking about? What were we solving for? How much popcorn they had left? They have 1 and 1/8 bag of popcorn together. So that's one way to get a common denominator. Just multiply the two denominators together, and that's going to be your new one. Then you have to figure out what you're multiplying the tops by to keep them equal to what you started with. Another way is to look for the LCM. So let's try that on this one. We're subtracting fractions. We need to get a common denominator. Before we do that, let's make this an improper. We did this before. Let's just make them improper to start with. So 3 times 6 is 18, plus the 1 is 19/6. Minus 2 times 10 is 20, plus the 3 is 23/10. So we could multiply 6 and 10, and we could get our new denominators to be 60, but that's not the lowest number that we could go with. What is the LCM of 6 and 10? Think about the multiples: 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. 30 is 6 goes into 30, and 10 also goes into 30. So 30 is going to be your lowest number. Perfect. Now, if you know what you want to get as your denominator, all you need to do now is show your work of what you do to the fractions to get that. So how do I get 6 to become 30? Multiply by 5. Remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you're doing to the top to keep the fractions equal. You can do something different on this fraction, okay? On this fraction, what would I want to multiply by to get 30 in the denominator? 3. Whatever you do to the bottom over here, you do to the top on this one as well. So our new fractions, 19 times 5. If you're not sure and you don't have a calculator for this chapter, you can always do it off to the side. And 3 times 23. Now we're ready to add or subtract our fractions in this case. We just subtract the numerators, keep the denominator. So 95 minus the 69 is going to be over top of 30. Try to do this without a calculator. You can always write your work off to the side. It's going to leave you with 26/30. The last step is always to check if you can simplify. You can still simplify here by taking out 2. And what you're left with is 13/15. Scuba divers must descend underwater very carefully, pausing and swallowing regularly to relieve pressure as they move down the rope. Sometimes they even have to rise for a few breaths if the pressure builds up too much. Mr. Cutlip descended 3/4 of the way down to his diving point, but had to rise 1/6 of the way back up to release his pressure. At this point, what fraction of the descent has he completed to his diving point? So think about it. There's a boat. There's going to be a rope that he's going down. He's lowering himself down to the sand at the bottom. He went down 3/4 of the way. So he went down 3/4 of the way. I would represent that with a negative 3/4. But then from that point, he had to rise a little bit back up. He had to rise back up what fraction? 1/6 of the way back up. So that would be like a positive 1/6. We want to know what fraction of the way down has he done at this point then. Get your common denominators, careful with the negatives, and don't forget to label your answer, or you could even write a sentence here. So 6 and 4, you could either multiply these together, or you could recognize there's a LCM that's lower than that. So this would be 24, but I don't have to go that high. 4 and 6 both can become 12 easily. Four times 3, 2 to the top as well. 6 times 2, do it to the top as well. Now we just add our numerators. It's going to give me negative 7/12. So you could leave it as negative 7/12. So we could really say Mr. Cutlip is 7/12 of the way down. So he's 7/12 of the way to his diving point. Again, a lot of times we use a negative number to represent that we're going below sea level, but you can write it in a sentence, and since you're saying down, that down is equivalent to using the negative. There's 2 more problems on your notes, and it's evaluating. So I want you to try these 2, plugging in what you know the variable is, and getting your common denominators, whether it's through finding the least common multiple or just multiplying your denominators together. Try these 2, then press play to go over it with me. On this first one, we plug in the negative 2/3. The common denominator I'm going to go for is going to be 15. That is the LCM in this case. So I would multiply the first fraction by 5/5, because 5 and 5 over 5 is really 1. So it's going to give me a negative 10/15. I'd multiply the second fraction by 3/3, which is really 1, so I'm keeping it the same. 1 times 3 is 3. Now I add the numerators, I get negative 7/15, and there's no reducing. If you multiply them together, then you'd still have the same work here. On the next problem, we have 5/9. Be careful with your substitution because it's minus the negative 7/12. So you need to show both of those minus signs, or the minus and the negative. Those 2 are going to cancel each other out, or they're going to make them plus a positive. So you actually have 5/9 plus 7/12. To find the least common multiple, you can think about the multiples of 9 and 12. They're going to both easily become 36. Show your work. Your teacher wants to see this. How did you get that 36? Add your fractions together. Now you may want to check with your teacher to see if you can leave your answer like this. It's better to put it in mixed form, I think. So 36 fits into 41 one whole time with a remainder of 5/36. These are equivalent answers, so you can write both of them down. Okay, you're on to your quick check.